Tank Battalion, equipped with a British Churchill tank. Armed with a 57mm gun and manned by a crew of 5, the Churchill was designed to be an infantry support tank. But the standard tank was unsuited for amphibious operations. Hasty modifications had to be made so that it could reach shore from a landing craft. But getting onto the beach was just one of its challenges. The Churchills then had to make their way across the gravel on the beaches themselves. Finally, they had to go over the seawall to get into the town of Dieppe. The Canadians conducted major landing rehearsals in June. The first was a disaster, but the second showed improvement. Encouraged, General Montgomery decided that the raid on Dieppe would be mounted on July 4th. But bad weather forced postponements. The Canadians became frustrated once again. Worse, there was a growing security problem. Although the Canadian troops had not yet received detailed orders, most had a good idea that their target was the port of Dieppe. There was a very real danger that they might divulge details of the operation while off duty. The concentration of landing craft in southern English ports could not be disguised from German air reconnaissance. This was reinforced when German FW-190 fighter bombers flying over the Isle of Wight swept down and fired on the assembled landing craft. It seemed certain that the Germans knew about the planned attack. The repeated postponement of Operation Rutter convinced many, including General Bernard Montgomery, that it had been compromised and that the raid on Dieppe should be cancelled. But Montgomery was then sent away from Britain to command the 8th Army in North Africa. Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, whose headquarters had planned the raid, insisted that the attack on Dieppe proceed. It would have a new code name, Jubilee. Mountbatten later said the British Chiefs of Staff gave verbal consent to proceed with the mission. It was not committed to paper to preserve secrecy. But a number of significant changes were made to the original plan. These included cancellation of the preliminary bombing attack on Dieppe for fear of unnecessary civilian casualties. The RAF also declared that because of the weather, it could not be sure of landing paratroopers close enough to neutralize the 2 key German coastal batteries. The airborne element of Operation Jubilee was therefore cancelled, but preventing the German batteries from firing on Allied amphibious forces at sea was still considered essential to the raid's success. British Army Commandos were therefore selected for this mission. Men of the newly formed U.S. Rangers, the American equivalent of the Commandos, were also training in Britain at this time. It was therefore decided that 50 Rangers should join their British counterparts in the assault. This would make them the first U.S. soldiers to see ground combat in the European theater. The Commandos and Rangers would be landed from the sea. They would then have to climb cliffs before attacking the batteries. Once they neutralized the German guns, the main landings would take place according to the original plan. After hitting the beaches, the Canadians would move inland and attack gun batteries and a nearby airfield before withdrawing. The appointed day of the assault, August 18th, 1942. As the fateful day approached, the Germans continued to fly photographic reconnaissance missions over England's southern coast. The photographs these sorties brought back made them even more certain that the British were about to mount an attack. German troops around Dieppe and all along the Atlantic Wall were put on high alert and conducted anti-invasion rehearsals. They also carried out live firing exercises on the beaches of Dieppe. In England, the troops of the 2nd Canadian Division and the Commandos made their final preparations for the raid. But on August 17th, just as they were preparing to sail, bad weather forced a 24-hour postponement. In the meantime, the RAF prepared its planes, determined to score a decisive victory over the Luftwaffe. 56 fighter squadrons would take part in the raid, including some from the United States 8th Air Force. On August 18th, Operation Jubilee was activated. Minesweepers began to clear a passage through the English Channel. That night, over 6,000 men, nearly 5,000 of them Canadians, set sail in 9 landing ships. Several of the ships were Channel ferries that once sailed the route from English ports to Dieppe. Shortly before 4 o'clock in the morning, the Allied naval force ran into a German coastal convoy. Both sides opened fire. The main attack force was unaffected by this clash. But the No. 3 Commando unit, which was responsible for neutralizing the Western Coastal Battery, lost 6 landing craft, including 1 carrying its commanding officer. As a result, only 18 out of 300 men landed on the beach. Leading them was Major Peter Young, who would become one of the most highly decorated commandos of World War II. Their objective was known as the Goebbels Battery. It was named after the Nazi propaganda minister. Peter Young and his men landed shortly before dawn. They had to climb the cliffs below the Goebbels Battery. Young spotted a gully laced with barbed wire. It seemed to be the only way up the cliffs. The commando struggled painfully to the top of the gully. Under constant fire, they advanced on the battery. The commandos moved through a cornfield which provided some cover. Then opened fire. The nearest gun began to traverse onto the commandos. Peter Young describes what happened next.
The Germans turned round the left-hand gun, number 4, and fired it straight at us. And there was a bloody great bang. Orange and black smoke came out of this thing, and it wandered over our heads and burst in a valley somewhere in France behind us. I then actually thought, well, what a very good thing, because if they're firing their guns at us and missing, they're certainly not firing at the British fleet.
Major Young now became concerned that the Germans would mount a counterattack. He was short of ammunition. He therefore withdrew his men to the beach. They were evacuated without loss. On the opposite flank at Fastaraval, the No. 4 Commando unit began an assault against the battery known as Haase. After landing, a fire support group under the command of Major Derek Mills Roberts climbed the steep cliffs overlooking Orange Beach. At the top of the cliffs, the Commandos set up their support weapons to cover for a group that was attacking the battery. Sergeant Major Jimmy Dunning was in charge of the mortar.
As soon as the signal came to fire, we opened up with the mortar. The first one fell a bit to the left, so we adjusted the angle of the mortar, and the second one went smack into the middle of the battery. We kept it at that angle. The next one, the third shot, actually hit the ammunition dump in the battery, and there was smoke and flames, and we knew we'd scored a bullseye.
The rest of the No. 4 Commando unit destroyed the gun battery and killed approximately 150 Germans. 45 Commandos were killed, wounded, or missing. The Commandos had successfully completed their part in Operation Jubilee. The main assault on Dieppe was now up to the Canadians. On the morning of August 19, 1942, RAF and U.S. fighter pilots took off for Dieppe. As Allied landing ships approached the French coast, 8 supporting destroyers fired on the shoreline. While dawn was breaking, the troops of the 2nd Canadian Division scrambled into their landing craft